Now, the aftermath of the global financial crisis of 2008 saw governments emphasizing the need to generate additional tax revenues to stimulate their economies. This drive, especially relating to international tax, raised the potential issue where countries come up with unilateral tax measures to drive on revenue growth. However, on November 4, 2021, 137 countries under the aegis of Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) adhered to the statement on a two-pillar solution to address the tax challenges arising from the digitalization of the economy. Pillar 1 aims to ensure a better distribution of taxation of multinationals across the country, across to the countries in which they operate, while Pillar 2 aims to control tax competition on corporate profits by introducing a global minimum tax of 15% from 2023. Although Nigeria, being among the 4 countries who are members of the OECD, opted out of the global tax deal due to what it described as unreliability of the economic impact of the deal for developing countries. Well, let's understand this better. I'm being joined via Zoom by the manager at Tax and Transfer Pricing, Deloitte & Touch, Mr. Joseph Latishe. Mr. Latishe, thank you so much for your time. It's been a while. It's good to see you.
Thanks, Tolu. Glad to be here.
Yes, what do you make of a vote of 136 of the 140 members of OECD slash G20 inclusive framework agreeing to adopt a two-pillar solution to address the tax challenges arising from digitalization of global economy?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Tolu. Okay, so since it was reported in October of last year that 136 countries out of 140 members of the inclusive framework had agreed to the deal, now 137 with the addition of Mauritania. It was like a case of a decision or an agreement had finally been reached, because that agreement was the result of years of bargaining and years of discussions at different levels, the G7, the G20, and indeed the inclusive framework. I think it's also important to note that when we say 136 out of 140 originally agreed to the deal, those are members of the inclusive framework, and not all countries in the world are members of that inclusive framework of the OECD. So, for instance, in Africa, only about 24 countries are part of that. So over 50% of African countries are not members of the inclusive framework. In fact, we have countries like Ghana, Algeria, Ethiopia that are not members of that inclusive framework. So the deal was reached, and like you rightly said, Nigeria, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Kenya did not join the deal. So what's this deal about? What's this two-pillar solution? I think the simplest way to talk about it is to talk about where we are currently in international taxation. The international tax rules that we currently use were molded decades ago, where we did not have the level of technology we have today. We did not have the level of digitalization that we have today. So those rules depended to a large extent on my presence in a country to make revenues from that country. And that's why we had concepts like the permanent establishment and fixed base. But with the advent of technology, I can make revenues from a country all year round without even stepping foot or even having a representative in that country. So it had always been a concern of bodies like the OECD. Even when the BEPS action plans, it was an action plan, and it was an action plan when the action plans were being looked at to say, how can we tax the digital economy effectively? The two-pillar solution tries to do that. Pillar 1 has both amount A and amount B, and the amount A tries to ensure a fair distribution of taxes, of revenue, of profits, and then of taxes from the multinational entities. The current position of the paper, it seeks to put in that umbrella companies or groups that make a minimum annual income of 20 billion euros, and add at least 10% of profits. Those are the kind of companies that are going to be subject to Pillar 1. And then you find out that it's 25% in excess, profits in excess of 10%, 25% of those will then be redistributed to countries that we call market economies. Those are the countries where these revenues were earned from. And then they can then share those profits and tax them accordingly. Same with Amount B tries to, which has not fully been established, but it is trying to say, okay, this is the minimum level of profits that a company that is into distributor that performs distributor function should earn in a particular country. And of course, then we have the Pillar 2, which I think it's popular among a lot of people, that seeks to have a minimum tax of 15%. Through the use of the global anti-base erosion rules and the subject to tax rules. I also heard you mention about the fact that Nigeria, why did Nigeria not sign up to this, or what our reasons are? What are our reasons? So basically, we know that we would only sign up to something that we feel it's in our best interest, and that's how it should be. And if you listen to the Honorable Minister of Finance, if you listen to FIRS and other relevant bodies, they tend to believe that this is not the best deal for us. We currently have significant economic presence rules in our laws, and these rules seem to give us a better chunk of tax revenues in this time where we need more revenues. They also believe that these rules may make us see the portion of our sovereignty, because one of the conditions of these rules is some mandatory dispute resolution system. And that would mean that if disputes arise from international tax and transfer pricing issues, you go through this dispute procedure instead of using the courts in Nigeria. So basically, in a nutshell, that's where we are, and that's our reason for not joining on this deal.
Brilliant stuff there, Mr. Latishe. I want to follow up that the new international tax will be expected to be implemented by 2023 through domestication in signatory countries. Now, are you now thinking, do you think any twists can come up between come to be and the Nigerian government joins the wagon as this reform seeks to ensure that multinational enterprises are subject to a minimum of 15% tax rate, and will also reallocate residual profit from the world's largest and most profitable MNEs to jurisdictions where they operate?
Well, Tolu, that's an issue of opinion. If you ask me from where I sit, we can never say never. It is something that can happen at any time. In fact, in a webinar that was hosted by FIRS at the end of last year, it was clearly mentioned that negotiation channels are still open, and Nigerian government is still open to any deal that we feel is favorable for us. But the current status quo is no, we are not joining on this deal. If you ask me, current developments do not look like we are seeing that as something we are going to join anytime soon. At least in subsequent finance acts, even the Finance Act 2021, updates have been made to our significant economic presence rules to refine them and to make them more workable. I think in the last Finance Act, it was explicitly then added that turnover basis of assessment can be used for significant economic presence. So all these actions are saying that we see these as something we're going to use long term. So it doesn't look like we're saying we are going to be joining this deal anytime soon. But like I said, never say never. Policies can change tomorrow. New negotiations can be made. So we just watch this space and see what happens.
Now, staying with Nigeria, the new rules and commitment to remove all digital service taxes under Pillar 1 could potentially impact the country's ability to earn revenues from companies who have created digital significant economic presence. Well, my question will be that how significant or how critical or strategic is the definition of significant economic presence, would you say, is being captured in the 2021 Finance Act, especially now at a time when the country needs sustainable non-oil revenue?
Okay. Okay, yeah, so that's a good question. And it goes back to my earlier comments on why Nigeria did not want to join up to this in the first place. Looking at what are our gains of joining this and what would we lose? Like we said, it's one of the conditions that all digital service taxes or anything of that nature would have to be dropped. And then if and this was one of the matters that was discussed in that webinar. FIS clearly said that they had done their simulations and it showed that they are better off staying here or staying with this approach. Let us remember, like I said earlier when I was talking about what those qualifications are, that it's only groups that make a minimum of 20 billion euros. And then for Nigeria, for instance, to also partake of the residual profits, like we call them, and that's talking about Pillar 1, that group would have to make at least 1 million euros from Nigeria in any year. When you compare that with our significant economic presence rules in our laws, for digital SCPs, they only need to make 25 million naira from Nigeria. 1 million euros, I can't calculate that right now, but that should be something around 450 million naira when compared with 25 million for digital SCPs. And for service SCPs, companies that provide consulting professional services, there is no threshold at all. So Nigeria seems to have a larger tax base when you use the significant economic presence rules when compared to the general qualifications in this tax deal. I think the minister also mentioned something like when you even apply those rules, only about 100 corporations fall within that group. And then out of those 100 corporations, you ask yourself, how many of those are any monies from Nigeria when compared to the large chunk of a population of companies that will then pay additional taxes in Nigeria using our own significant economic presence rules. So I guess this is the benefit analysis that was done in deciding that, no, thank you, we're going to be sticking with what we have.
Brilliant stuff. Now, while there is some respect for the nation's decision to still hold out, the stance of the African Tax Administration Forum is clear. There may be some backlash and concerns of pressure to be applied on such countries is rife. Now, prior to the current consensus, there were trade tensions globally when countries introduced unilateral digital service tax. What are your thoughts with regards to this?
Well, yes. So of course we all know what we observed prior to this deal being made. We had countries coming up unilaterally with their digital service taxes. I think France was one of the major ones. They are coming up with a 3% digital service tax. And at that point, Donald Trump was president of the US, and he had some tweets about this, about some retaliations that were going to be made. And that's why bodies like the OECD stepped in and felt that it was good we had this global tax deal, because they were going to be, how do I put that? There are going to be some negative effects to international trade and development if those retaliations were allowed to stay, and there was a need to come to a normal footing or to a consensus. I think if you look at data from the OECD, for instance, it's estimated that the Pillar 1 would lead to about 125 billion US dollars being shared under the Pillar 1 solution, and Pillar 2 is going to lead to about, I think, 150 billion US dollars in additional taxes for on companies. So it's felt that this is the best approach to achieve two objectives. Number one, get additional tax revenues, and number two, prevent a situation where we would have retaliations that lead to reduction in international trade. So that fear has always been there that if we take this sort of position, is it going to lead to a backlash? Of course, that fear will always be there, but I don't see that happening. And then some commentators would also tell you that, considering that Nigeria is not an export-oriented country as it is currently, we are hoping to fully be there, that Nigeria is most likely not going to bear any brunt when it comes to these retaliatory efforts. So, but of course, if they come, it's going to even truncate the limited trade we already do, and of course, it's not the best for us. We don't want it to also affect investments into the country by way of FDI or FPIs. So, generally, we are in the position of waiting to see what occurs right now, but we are all hoping that it just leads to us applying our own SCP rules without having any retaliations. In line with
Mr. Latije, thank you for really breaking this down for us. I must appreciate that. But at the core of domestic issues around the harmonization of tax administration, President Buhari's speech on 2021 Finance Act, empowering the FRS as a sole authority to administer tax for the federal government, seems to provide more clarity. Now, how critical would you say it is to get this right, especially following rows last year of who collects what at subnational and national levels?
Yeah, so it's pretty critical, and I think it was based on listening to the yearnings of people that was done. It does not mean that we have reached the finish line, because I'm also aware that the National Assembly has held some sessions recently about updating that in the next Finance Act, maybe to give some other bodies the power to generate revenues. But there is no doubt that certainty and that ease of administration that comes with having a single focal point is very, very important. It makes me as a taxpayer know that I'm not going to be open to multiple audits by multiple agents coming for the same principle. That's the kind of situation we were facing before. These are agents for the same federal government coming to me for separate audits on similar items. So of course, I would feel frustrated as a taxpayer when I have that significant burden and additional cost of compliance. So it's pretty important, and it will also lead to revenue generation and also lead to a more trustworthy tax system.
Interesting conversation. I must thank you so much for your time, Mr. Joseph Alatishe. He is the manager, tax and transfer pricing, Deloitte and Touch. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
And you too.